Good morning, everyone. Today is May 19th of 2021, which is the anniversary of Swami Kriyananda's birthday. So we're going to depart from what we have been talking about, which is the Ananda way of life, and just spend a half an hour enjoying the fact that he incarnated. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religion, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to appreciate, heart, mind, and soul, the extraordinary love of the divine for each one of us, manifested in countless ways, including the return, the frequent return of your enlightened sons, your inspired leaders, the deep devotees and saints who come to guide our way. Help us to receive their magnetic influence, that we too may follow in their footsteps and perfect ourselves in divine love. Om. Peace. Amen. I remember on Swami's 80th birthday, I think it was his 80th, when there were many hundreds of us gathered together at Ananda Village, at the Crystal Hermitage Garden to honor Swamiji, and at the outdoor amphitheater that they have up at the village. And Swami said, I'm 80 years old, I'm officially an old man, you have to indulge me while I reminisce. And then he just talked, he reflected about in many ways about the incarnation he'd had and just what a privilege it had been to serve in that way. I'm not quite 80. I have about 6 more years to go before I reach 80, but I'm going to claim the same right. I'm old enough that I get to reminisce a little bit and you just have to put up with it. So there you have it. I know you have the free will not to watch this, so I can do whatever I wish. But I have lived long enough to be able to look back with some extraordinary sense of gratitude and appreciation. And I'm going to sort of move over to something else for a moment first. The whole issue of divine incarnations and guru, the avatar, ever and again through your awakened sons, the answer comes. This is in the festival of light, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates. The divine spirit takes infinite form to just awaken us again and again. And we can look back over the course of history and you see, Lord Krishna, Lord Rama, Lord Buddha, Shankaracharya, Chaitanya, Ramakrishna recently, Paramhansa Yogananda. And then all of them have with them this group of devotees, disciples, apostles. Jesus had his 12 apostles. Master had the recurring company of great saints. In the life of Ramakrishna, who was an avatar in the 1800s in India, the late 1800s, one of the stories that he tells, talking about his chief disciple, Ramakrishna, and a group of 6 or 7 others, these extraordinarily great disciples that were with him, who became the core of his monastery and the core of his work. And they tell this story about, was it Ramakrishna's own vision or somebody else's own vision, that somewhere in the divine realm there was this little baby, and there were 7 sages, as I recall the story, and the 7 sages were deeply lost in the contemplation of the infinite. And then the baby comes, and he tugs on them, and he brings them out of their deep contemplation and says, I'm going to the material plane, you have to come with me. And then these great sages pull themselves out of their deep contemplation of the infinite and take on human form. And the story being that Ramakrishna was the baby, and Vivekananda and Brahmananda and others whose names I can't say so readily, I don't know them, that these great disciples of the Master also came with him. And this, in every story about a great Master, there's also this play. When Krishna incarnated, there was his great disciple Arjuna. Master tells us that he himself was Arjuna and that Babaji was Krishna. When Master came as William the Conqueror, the Bishop of Canterbury was Lanfranc, and Lanfranc was Sri Yukteswar. When Swami came as William's son Henry, the cleric who was his companion was Anselm, and Anselm was Rajasi Janakananda. And you just sort of see this story where these great souls are working together, and they're working together over a long period of time, more time than certainly my little mind can even begin to answer. In one of the last chapters of The New Path, Swami talks about spiritual families, and he has this whole picture of, he always starts with the cosmic gases and how they gradually magnetize themselves together, and great souls, these great saints like Master, whose origins of realization are lost in time. You don't know where and when they became what they are, which is completely free. Excuse me a moment. But Swami talks about just how the power of these groups begins to develop and how we really form, there's no other word for it, divine families, you might even say divine teams. And we all begin to work together to save the world, to help the world, to find our brothers and sisters, to awaken receptive hearts. Swami Kriyananda talks about, of course, in addition to being Kriyananda to Yogananda in this lifetime, Swami was Henry I when he was William the Conqueror, and Alfonso X when Master was Ferdinand in The King of Spain. I've spoken of these things before. There's a wonderful book, 2 Souls, 4 Lives, that Catherine Kairavi wrote about Henry and William. And in each case, the avatar comes, then Swamiji specifically has this duty to bring into clear manifestation the message and the mission of the Master. And it has to be said, and Swami writes it there, that many of us are also on that same string. Many years ago, it was in the early 70s, as it happened, I was in a taxi cab with Swami in New York City. The setting was not relevant, except it's part of my memory of the moment. And I was trying to figure this thing out about these divine relationships. And Swamiji always wanted us to understand that whatever power flowed through him, that power emanated from his discipleship to Master. And I have never been able to understand, and to this day I can't really explain it. Where does Swami begin and end? Where does Master start? How do I, as sort of the next child in the family, just move down, my father, my grandfather, how do I sort all of this out? And I was talking to Swamiji about it, and I was sort of asking him about these relationships. And he was saying, as he often said then, that when you have an avatar, you want to give all credit to the avatar. He said, I'm just a disciple. I said, sir, but it must be so that my connection to you must have been going on long before realization comes. And he said, well, of course. These relationships of teacher and student and friend to friend, however you call it, when they achieve the depth that many of us have with Swamiji and many of us have with Master, that's not a one incarnation experience. In the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about the sort of stages of understanding. First, no one ever talks to you about divine truth, and this is over many incarnations. Then people try to talk to you about divine truth, and you don't understand a word that they say. And then people tell you about divine truth, and you just dismiss it as irrelevant. And, step by step by step, over many lifetimes, and the relationships keep repeating themselves. So those of us who consider ourselves part of this family, either deeply for many lifetimes or just, as Swami describes, being drawn into this flow of energy, we're entering into something very powerful and very ancient. And it's a great privilege and a great blessing from God to have reached the point of understanding and longing, where these teachings not only make sense to us, but we recognize them as our raft over the ocean of delusion. I was speaking to someone recently who had been through a very traumatic life experience, the kind of thing that, alas, is all too common: death, disappointment, betrayal, expectations disappointed, high consciousness meeting lower consciousness, and not receiving what we desire. And it was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking for the person who experienced, heartbreaking for me to listen. The only thing that saves me in such a moment is what Swamiji said. This is the kind of suffering that brings us to God. Because the way we are made, the way God made us, and I think it was a nasty trick, but that's what he did, is that we want to eliminate all other possible options before we settle on the fact that God is the only solution. And we only learn from our own experience. Nobody can tell you. So we go forth in great longing, hoping that this time it's going to work. And this time meaning that I will find perfect love and perfect happiness in the ever-changing material world. And we don't. And we suffer intently, and enough times until it occurs to us that there is another answer. And then once we get a hold of that, and really get a hold of that, it doesn't mean we're completely free by any means, but we really get a hold of that fact, then we can never let go. We may try to let go, but we can never let go, because we have glimpsed the reality of that potential in it. Nothing else will ever satisfy. So, of course, Swamiji made that decision who knows how long ago. When he was writing, when he was editing the first part of The New Path, and that book published in 1978, I believe, so it was right around that time. This was the summer of 76. Let me think about that, but it might have been 77, it doesn't matter. And he was doing the final polishing of the chapter where he met Master. And I was working with him. I and Kalyani, another woman, were there. He was in seclusion in Hawaii, and we'd gone to be secretarial help. So I was typing the chapter, and he was editing, and I was retyping. And I had already been working at our guest retreat. Somehow from the very beginning, whatever was given to me, I was passing it on. And so I knew a certain amount about how people come to the spiritual path. And I said to Swami very seriously, I said, Swamiji, this story of yours where you find autobiography of a yogi in such in such a magical way and are compelled to buy the book, and you read the book and less than a week after you found the book, you're sitting in front of Master being initiated as a disciple, just having dropped everything and gone to be with him. I said, it's a magnificent story, but almost no one has an experience like that. And as a consequence, people are going to feel that if they don't have this magnificent instant recognition, that maybe this isn't their path. And Swami was very serious when he answered me. Even I was serious too. This wasn't a joke. It was this book is going to help people, but it's also going to confuse them. And Swami very seriously said, yes, I know. He said, that is a problem. That is a problem with my story. He said, but of course that's how it happened, so I have to tell it that way. And he said that he'd spent a long time trying to think if there was some other way he could tell it, so that it would be more like the gradual awakening that is more natural. But his biography had two purposes. One was it introduces people to the path, and that's why he called it that, because the whole second half of the book is his life with Master. And even to this day, there's nothing that even comes close to it. Durga Mata's Trilogy of Divine Love is the closest thing, but that's a very different book than Swami's. She wrote a very personal story. Swami did everything he could to universalize the story. And the only reason he included himself in the book was that he felt that as a Westerner, and the process of seeking and finding as a Westerner would speak to modern times, not merely to the USA and Europe, but also to the westernized mindset, which has become universal. Just a moment. So his intention in writing that book was to introduce us to Master and to use himself as an example. But of course, the divine intention was also to introduce us to Swamiji. And so the reality of that instant recognition, the power of Master's acceptance of him, to initiate him as a disciple, to take him into the monastery within an hour of their first meeting, within a week of when Swami first heard the words guru and karma and reincarnation and all of that. And Master offering Swami his unconditional love at that first meeting, just like that. I mean, all of this speaks to what what later was presented to us of this very, very, very long association. At one point, one of Swami's fellow monks in Mount Washington, who was inclined to have visions and all kinds of experiences, had a vision, valid or otherwise, of being Master's disciple on the island of Lemuria. And Lemuria is a legend, likely a true legend, of other yuga cycles in which there was this very advanced civilization, and it was approximately 80,000 years ago. And so this monk had a vision of himself with Master as Master's disciple on the island of Lemuria 80,000 years ago. Swami's response to it was to say to Master, have I been your disciple, for 80,000 years? Meaning, how long does it take to get liberated? Master said to Swami, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. It was such a perfect answer. And Swami then had to say, does it always take such a long time? Master said yes. He said desire for, and then I think he said name and fame, or this thing or that thing. It just, we come in and then we pull out, and then we come in and then we pull out. And then we have to have all these experiences that each one we follow to the end, and we discover whether or not it's going to make us happy. And when we discover that it's not, we become more and more committed to the only path that's really going to work. I remember when before I met Swami, I had this feeling, which now I understand. I knew it was true, and I behaved accordingly because I knew it was true, but only when I got the language and the understanding of this path did I really know. But I could see as a teenager, and I was talented, and I had opportunity. I mean, we were not wealthy, but we were well established, my family, and I could have done whatever I wanted to do. The opportunity would have been there. The family would have supported me, and my innate ability would have taken me. And you know, the only things I could think of to be: a doctor, a lawyer, a college professor. I didn't have much of a talent for business or anything like that, but those kinds of ideas. But honestly, at the age of 15, I sat there and it was like I could see the end. I could see my whole life. I could see all the decades of playing all those stories out, and then I could see my deathbed. Now, I don't know how much I'm projecting backwards, because now I really can see my deathbed because I've been with people passing. I know the Ananda scene, and I know just how it's going to play itself out. You know, people will be serious for a while, and then they'll laugh, and then they'll just enjoy pizza, and then they'll tell jokes, and then they'll remember that I'm dying, and they'll come back and pay attention to me. I mean, all of it I love. It's all very real and and the dying person will gradually separate from this world. So even at 15, somehow I could see that. And I could see the absolute emptiness of every one of those roads. That, you know, there would be success, but it would just go through my fingers by the end. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. And then I met Swami, you know, because we are a long, lasting, big family, and there are many of us. Swami talks about Master's family being a great nation, even with many small families within it. And you know, it's like Master's family is a great nation, and within it we can see there are many disciples of Master, Swami Kriyananda, of course, being mine, and many of yours, but certainly mine. This is the family within Master's family that I belong to. And let's just say it's been a long time. And Swamiji just keeps coming back. Toward the end, well, in the middle of Swamiji's life, he developed intense vairagya. The vairagya got more intense as he grew older. Vairagya is a profound disinclination for the things of this world. And I was talking with Swamiji in a restaurant once and jokingly said, because of the feeling of my fate being so closely tied to his, that when you come back the next time, sir, can we wait for a higher yuga? Because this yuga is really not much fun. And his first response was, I don't intend to come back at all. He said it very emphatically. And then he said, even the higher yugas, he said, it's still the material plane. It's not God realization. But then he made the wonderful promise, people like us are in charge. That's what he said. I said, so the whole world is like Ananda? He said, yes. I said, well, that sounds a lot more pleasant. But his vairagya was such that he just didn't want that. But he changed his mind. And I was on a phone conversation with him much later. And he was in Europe at that point. And I believe this was just about the time that he was getting ready to go to India, or when the idea came that he would move to India. But I think he had finished writing. I'm going to not be exact. It doesn't make any difference. But it was toward the end of his life, in the last decade. And he'd had a major, he was having heart problems. And I was talking to him on the phone, and he said, basically, that his life force that the night before had become so light. There was so little life force in him. He said, I could have just slipped away. Because he said, I could so easily have just slipped away. And I felt sincerely I needed to speak honestly to him. And I said, sir, you've done the work of a dozen people in this lifetime. Everything that Master expected of you has been fulfilled. I said it would be absolutely selfish of us to try to keep you here. It's just with deep gratitude, sir, if, please just go when you have the chance to go. And Swamiji, of course, I knew where I was coming from. But I said, it won't be any fun to be on this planet after you leave. And then he said something about, I hope when I leave this world, I would prefer never to come back. But then he said, but I know myself. He said it just like that. I know myself. He said, I know that I'll come back to help all of you. And I said, sir, that's the only reason you came this time, isn't it? To help all of us. Well, yes, he said, there is that. That's the only reason he was here. He was here to help all of us. And that's really something. I'm not proposing that he was an avatar. I believe he was a Jivan Mukta. I believe he just let the karma run, as Master put it. He could have been free at any point, but he let the karma run in order to come back and help us. Although Master said this last life as Kriyananda, he would become a siddha. He would be completely free. The karma was going to be finished. But still, he said, I'll come back to help you. Now, that in itself is something really just deep and powerful to meditate on. The greater can no love be than this, from a life of infinite joy and freedom, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death, merely to help others. Whatever else you can say about Swamiji, he lived for one purpose, to serve his guru. And service to his guru was to carry out the mission that his guru came to fulfill. And that was very simple, to uplift others with his own consciousness and with the teachings that he could articulate. Just, he came for me. He came for you. He came for this planet. He came to carry out what he has always carried out. Master is one jiva. And what gives the Master's mission power, yes, his consciousness is there, but it's the willing instruments. Think about it. Every one of us, our life has been changed by the willing instruments. And Master is the origin point, but Master looks back to Babaji, looks back to the line of gurus, and then the disciples look back to that line of gurus and say, very simply, how can I serve? Swami's lifetime, his entire life, how can I serve? How can I serve? And of course, that's the footprint, because that is how the great masters show us again and again. In the Festival of Light, greater can no love be than this, and the Master sacrifices and comes to the world. The next sentences here then is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey. There are 4 stages. We start out with the mission. We go into the revolt, where we say there's another way to be happy than attunement to God. That fails, We go on the quest, what is true. Then we discover what is true, and we go to the fourth and last stage, where we live entirely to answer the question, how can I serve? You know, that is Swami's legacy to us, because that was Swami. I know myself. I'm going to come back to help you. And we need to come to know ourselves and to make ourselves to be able to answer that same question in the same way. I know myself. I'm here to serve. And that is the freedom that we're seeking. This is the fourth and last stage. And by the grace of God, Gurus and Swamiji, you know, may we all move out of the revolt into the quest and into that final freedom. I know myself. I'm here to serve. God bless you.